Your Excellencies, my dear brother priest, my dear sisters, good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Father Noel San Vicente from the Diocese of San Jose, California, and my task is to introduce our speaker. I'll give you first the official part. He was born in Talipon, the province of Bohol, the Philippine Islands, on the 10th of June 1959. He was ordained priest for the Diocese of Tagbilaran on the 29th of June 1985. Then in 1986, he was incardinated to the newly created Diocese of Talibon, of the province of Bohol. He earned a doctorate in theology in Rome in 1990, a licentiate in canon law in Rome in 1989, a licentiate in philosophy in Manila in 1981, a master's degree in education in Manila in 1986, and a diploma on diplomatic service of the Holy See in Rome in 1990. He joined the diplomatic service of the Holy See in 1990 and successfully served at the Apostolic Nunciature in Madagascar, in Bulgaria, and then in Albania. He then served as the Secretary of State in the Vatican from 1998 to 2006. From there, he was appointed First Counselor of the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations in New York from the years 2006 to 2008. He was appointed Apostolic Nuncio to Haiti on the 8th of May 2008 and was ordained Archbishop on the 3rd of July 2008 at St. Peter's Basilica. He was appointed Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the United Nations in New York on the 1st of July 2014 and Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the Organization of American States on the 16th of July 2014. Despite his busy schedule, he is here with us. If you are subscribing to the Vatican Information Service, his speeches, his interventions are quoted. And I sent him an email and I said, Your Excellency, you are the answer to our prayers as you negotiate for peace in the Middle East, as you remind the community of nations of their responsibility to share the wealth of the wealthy nations to the poor. That's the official part of the introduction. Now, very briefly, the unofficial part. He was my classmate for 8 years.
Give it to us.
I have known him as a seminarian because together we studied at the Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas and resided at the Central Seminary. He was a well-rounded candidate to the priesthood. He excelled in sports, tennis, basketball, pelota, name it. He excelled in music. He, if you can ask him to sing, he's a tenor too. Wow. And listen to this. He has photographic memory. Wow. So you don't have to introduce yourself to him many times. He would remember you with your name and who you are, only once. We have to memorize notes and pages of books. He does not need to memorize. Whatever book you give him, he remembers the dates and the persons involved. Well, there is competition in that. I must confess to you that we had competition in class, but I surrendered on the second year because of his brilliance. While some priests have gift of tongues, our speaker has a command of at least 12 languages. When he was assigned in Madagascar, he learned the language. When he was assigned in Bulgaria, he learned the language. When he was assigned in Albania, he learned the language. And now he is fluent in French, Italian, and of course English. Your Excellency, thank you for coming. We're ready to listen to you. Our speaker, Most Reverend Bernardito C. Auza, Apostolic Nuncio, Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the United Nations and Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the Organization of American States.
Just to test photograph.
I forgot it in my room. Yeah. I really panicked. But listening to Father Noel's introduction, you might think I'm the precursor of iPhone and iPad and photograph pages of books. False. Anyway, thank you. It's true that we were classmates and we had a nice time. I think that was one of the signs of our vocation that we were very happy when we were seminarians. And I think you have been wondering, and you are still wondering, why someone like me, who has not even been a parish priest, pastor, as you call them here, although it sounds like Protestant in the Philippines. I have never been a pastor, and I have never really worked in a parish for a long time. And why should I talk about effective pastoral leadership? How on earth, you may say, what authority do I have to speak about it? And you think that I might as well talk about leadership at the United Nations, or something like that. So I have to immediately justify myself. I got a letter from Father Angel Gamad just ordering me to talk about this topic. You know, when Father Angel was a seminarian, lagi siyang kiniliti by then seminarian Bishop Yet Cabaho. One day, because of too much kiliti, Father Angel fainted and fell on the floor right in front of my door. And Father Yet was very, very scared. He said he had to bring him to the hospital. Anyway, this seminarian who was always kiliti is now the president of our assembly, the president who is dictating to me what to do. So it's a huge progress. But the seminarian who also kiliti him is now a bishop, and you have seen him around. And on his part, there is also a big progress. But I'm not trying to encourage the seminarians to tickle one another. If that is the case, we have some bishops here who certainly would not approve of it, especially here in the States. Killing here might be considered abuse. As the ano ba yun? In England, it's already poking. So it becomes a different, that's something cultural. In fact, this morning I was thinking of asking the Cardinal one question, but you know, Father Angel really stopped everything because he said, it's time. You know, I was curious if, being a very successful ecclesiastic, if he was kiniliti or siya naningiliti. We still have time to ask him about that, but afterwards. So I asked Angel last Friday, how long should my talk be? He said it's the time allotted is 1 hour and a half, and you know, give some time for questions and answers. I I said, question and answer. I said, I'd rather make my tongue very long because I don't want them to ask me questions. I will not be able to answer. But anyway, I said I've learned that because I asked him, because one time, 8 years ago exactly, I gave a retreat to a group of sisters in Spoleto, a very beautiful Franciscan place. And then the superior gave me a tip the evening before we started. He said, the sisters would like short talks and long walks in the woods. I said, sister, it sounds more like tourism rather than annual retreat. But I totally agree with you. And thinking that you have decided to have this assembly in Orlando, I really think that your first purpose is tourism. So you wouldn't have so much patience of long talks. But anyway, I'll give you a long talk so that you will not ask me questions afterwards. Excellencies, my dear brother priests, looking at the brochure of this conference and looking at the subject that has been assigned to me, I have the impression that I'm going to give just a summary of the whole assembly, of all the talks that are being given and will be given in this assembly. Because the final objective of all these talks is really how we could become effective pastors, how we could become effective leaders of our communities of faith. Thank God that Father Angel, added the second part of my talk. He said, effective pastoral leadership in the light of the EVANGELII GAUDIUM. So at least in the second half I may be able to justify my talk and my free room, and Father Angel promised me he will refund my air ticket. I can say, okay, according to EVANGELII GAUDIUM, anyway, I saw the Pope 3 times in 9 months, so I have some credentials. Just to say that being also a nuncio, I have to read this document so many times, because talking to the Conference of Bishops of Haiti, talking to the clergy, talking to everybody, to the clergy, I just underlined one theme, and that was the subject of Monsignor Dimario's talk this morning, effective homilies. Because this one, there's a very long section in this EVANGELII GAUDIUM about homilies. But that is just one of the marks of effective pastoral leadership. And that is why I said all the talks we have this morning, all the talks we're going to have this afternoon are all geared towards effective pastoral leadership. There are indeed many marks of effective pastoral leadership, either learned from books, or learned from our professors, but above all, learned from our experiences on the ground. So it is hard for us to talk about these topics because we know that each of you has already a very rich pastoral experience, and through this experience you have reflected on them, and then you gather lots of good lessons. So I said, looking at the brochure, we have the dialogue with culture, we have effective homiletics, we have treating migrants and strangers as brothers and sisters. We have the theme of joy in the priesthood, and we also have a theme of treating one another, being brothers in the priesthood. Moreover, EVANGELII GAUDIUM is so rich in pastoral indications on how we should go about our pastoral ministry in a changed and changing world. On my part, I would simply make my reflection on this theme on 3 points. Cardinal Tanley had 5 this morning. I want to have only 3. The first is, of course, knowledge. The first condition so that we could be effective is to know the context, to know the terrain, to know the ground, to know the communities with which or in which we are assigned to become pastoral leaders. So first, knowledge. Knowledge of where you are. Knowledge of your situation. The second point that I would like to underline is reaction. What is our reaction? How should we react to this new and changing and changed situation? So that is the response. What is our response to this situation? The third is the actor. That's you, the bishops, etc. The actor who is the implementer of this response. So the actor must know the situation, he must know how to respond, and third, he must look at himself first if he could respond effectively to the situation. So first of all, the situation, the pastoral context in which we exercise our pastoral leadership. We can never be effective if we ignore the concrete situations of the individuals and communities you are called to serve. As Cardinal Tagle put it this morning, know where the wells are. What elements characterize the situation of our faithful today? I could not certainly give a one description fits all situations, because our pastoral situations are as varied as the parishes, as the communities you serve. Urban or rural, wealthy or poor, long-time residents or newly arrived migrants, highly intellectual or hardly educated, practicing or non-practicing Christians, mostly old or mostly young. And as Father Arnold Zamora, my classmate, who is the pastor of Holy Name in Sunset, where Bishop Walsh is. And by the way, there was one thing that Noel missed in my CV. I was ordained by Bishop Walsh as a priest. He has retired and decided to take his place. And as Arnold would say, mostly handsome or mostly ugly. I tell you that EVANGELII GAUDIUM does not include this last as a category of effective pastoral leadership. It's very true. I'm in the place where I live, in Manhattan. I don't want to talk about it, but it's very true. The parish where we belong, our parish nearby, there are two. I mean, they have to cater to these, I would say, long-term residents, long old families, old money, and practically no migrants, because the cheapest house you could get there is probably $25 million. Don't come and visit me. I'm telling that because they must have an approach, you know, different from somebody who is right at the border, who has to deal with so many situations and problems related to migration. These are the people who have been there for practically many generations. EVANGELII GAUDIUM gives us an overall reading of the contemporary challenges to our pastoral ministry. As you know, the apostolic exhortation was born out of a certain collective ecclesial anxiety, or we would even say a collective ecclesial hysteria, which we can formally call a collective ecclesial solicitude, or pastoral anxiety. We have to define the anxiety, because we have discovered that there is a deep crisis of faith, especially in the churches we call churches of ancient evangelization, namely above all Europe, Western Europe. And because of this crisis, practically the transmission of the faith is gone. So we are not only at a crossroad, we feel like we are in a cul-de-sac at the end of the road. So faith does not influence people's lives and decisions anymore. As the Cardinal said this morning, we live in a virtual world and yet we have to be authentic human beings. It seems that people who have lived, who are living in this virtual world, they have also become virtual human beings. And that is the problem. And that is why in 2012 there was the Ordinary Synod for New Evangelization. And the data, the reflections gathered in that synod are gathered by Pope Francis, and he also, for sure, enriched them with his own thoughts in what we call the Apostolic Exhortation, EVANGELII GAUDIUM, the joy of faith. Some passages of this document describe best what Pope Francis wants us to see in our world today, what Pope Francis wants us to see in our pastoral situation, in our church today. So these indications are there. In the talk of Cardinal Tagle this morning, these indications are like the wells that we have to find. These are what we call in Latin the loci of our pastoral leadership. And what are these situations? If you read the document, I hope that you have already read it, otherwise I'll stop. Anyway, I really invite you to read it, because although it's very long, but it's rather easy and enjoyable reading. If it is about the joy of the gospel, you must have also a certain joy in your heart to read it. Chapter 2, which is pretty long, it's more than 60 numbered paragraphs, tells us about our situation today. The Pope, this is really one of the golden lines, you might say, of his magisterium. The first situation that he underlines in this chapter is the great disparity between rich and poor. And he continues to talk about it in the whole of chapter 4, which is also very long, on the economic aspect of new evangelization. And, Rush Limbaugh, of course, Rush Limbaugh said this, Pope is communist. He is talking about the poor. And just a few days ago, the Pope made his most complete, when I say respond to it. Complete, but very, very short. He was talking to these leaders of garbage collectors, the landless farmers, etc. who went to the Vatican for a seminar for gathering organized by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. And he said, when I talk about the poor, when I talk about the marginalized people, they call me communist. But they don't understand that the heart of the gospel is Jesus' love for the poor. That is really the first well that the Holy Father wants us to visit. That's really the first locus of pastoral leadership that we have to take care of, especially those who are in parishes with so much disparity between the rich and the poor. And then the second thing that he considered very important to note in our situation today is there is a great divide between those highly educated and ignorant people, in which they are at the increase in terms of numbers. Between those who have an iPhone and those who don't even have yung laptop na parang telepono, kasi the newer kids. People who have never seen a telephone. People, of course, who use everything that all these modern means of communications consider or use them as a matter of factly, as if they have always been there, or as if everybody possessed it. And people who even don't have a radio, etc. All this also contribute to the economic divide. And the Pope specifically speaks of what he called a financial system which rules rather than serves. the new idolatry of money that excludes people, that fires workers just to have a greater margin of profit. Countries that throw away huge quantity of food. You know, these tons of milk, tons of olive oil, etc. Tons of corn and rice being burned and thrown away to maintain the high price and the high margin of profits. That is one of the things that the Pope said, we should know this, and if we know this, we must have the courage to renounce it. That's what I do at the UN. I'm not talking about what I do, but that is what we must do, all of us. And, of course, this is even probably more important. The vast and very complex set of cultural challenges. We know that there is nothing, there is no other aspect of life that influences our practice of faith more than culture, more than cultural changes, more than cultural trends. The Pope tells us that these cultural challenges that we face are characterized by widespread indifference, by relativism, and by individualism. And there is the widespread secularization that tends to reduce faith and the church to the sphere of what we call the sacristy. Let's limit faith. Let's leave the faith in the church after Mass. Once we are out, we do another thing, and we don't think about the faith. As the Holy Father says, in this prevailing culture, priority is given to what is outward, to what is visible, to what is pleasing to the senses. Okay? To what is quick and immediate. You know, this, I want this now, and I want it immediately. That certainly does not promote what we call reflection, or what we call interior life. I'm not saying that they are enemies. If you want something now, and it is good, it doesn't mean that you stop meditating. Of course not. And they're connected to this. It's very interesting, and I think it's very true. Because there is this explosion in some parts of the world. Even in the Philippines, also in the 1980s, already this was verified, especially in Latin America, Brazil, etc. And now after the earthquake in Haiti, there's an explosion of what we call Pentecostal churches. What we call evangelical churches. They are in every quarter. You know, the pastor wakes up one day, I want to find my church. And in my house. And the Pope says that this is certainly a response to a certain spiritual longing because of our certain alienation from our spiritual side due to the fact that we have become devoured by these cultural changes, that we are not brotherly anymore, that we don't know anymore how to share. We are not any more sensible to the needs of our neighbors, etc. On the other hand, he said, these, we call Pentecostal or evangelical churches, you know, they're fly-by-night churches, you might say, they are also there to exploit the poor and the ignorant. It is not very politically correct to say that, but the Pope says it in EVANGELII GAUDIUM. That's why it's very hard. I mean, I couldn't say that when I was in Haiti. It was very difficult for me because immediately they said, oh, you are not friendly to these churches. You are not friendly to these pastors. And yet the Pope said, it is true. Why are these people there and they always have the 10%? And why is, even though they are very poor, they are willing to give their 10%? Did you imagine if Father Carl, the Good Shepherd, he will charge all his parishioners a tithing of 10%. Probably he will bring all of us to Waldorf Astoria instead of Disney World. He will have lots of money. And yet we don't do that. We don't want to have our faithful oblates, certainly, to give. But of course, we want them to contribute. But it is very interesting that even these poor people, once they are caught into this cycle, because you said you're in a desperate situation, you know, they say, okay,